The prison gate opened with a sound that echoed longer than it should have. Cold iron scraping against cold iron. A slow, reluctant movement, then silence. The kind that makes your chest tighten before your mind understands why. 70 years ago, on a pale morning wrapped in fog and unanswered prayers, a man walked out of prison. He did not look relieved. He did not look grateful. He looked unfinished. Like something had been paused, not ended. The guards watched him go without a word. They had seen men like him before. Men who smiled too little. Men whose eyes stayed dark even in daylight. Across the road stood his wife. She had dressed carefully that morning. Gloves pulled tight around hands that would not stop trembling. A coat buttoned all the way up even though the air was mild. Her face was calm, practiced, almost convincing. But her eyes told another story. Hollow, tired, determined in a way that came not from hope but from fear of turning back. She was the reason he was free. For months she had written letters in careful handwriting. She had sat on hard wooden benches in courtrooms that smelled of dust and judgment. She had cried at the right moments, spoke softly, promised change, promised supervision, promised that the man the town feared no longer existed, and the law believed her. Some said it was mercy. Others said it was a mistake waiting to happen. The town gathered at a distance, not close enough to greet him, not far enough to pretend they didn't care. Faces peeked from behind newspapers. Curtains shifted just slightly. People remembered. They remembered police cars outside that same house years earlier, remembered shouting, remembered how suddenly everything had gone quiet back then too. Hope was scarce. Fear was not. At the edge of town, in a small house that had once been full of noise, two children waited. They pressed their faces to the window until the glass fogged with their breath. Small hands left smudges on the pane. They smiled without knowing why. Smiled because they had been told to. Smiled because adults said this was a happy day. Their father was coming home. They did not understand courts or crimes or forgiveness. They did not know how to read the tension in a room. They did not recognize the way silence can warn you long before words do. They only knew absence. And now an ending to it. But something in that house had already cracked. It was subtle at first, easy to ignore if you didn't know where to look. The wife stopped walking to church. Sundays came and went without her familiar silhouette in the pew. The curtains stayed drawn long after sunrise. Neighbors waved and received no wave back. Then came the silence. Not peaceful silence, not the quiet of rest, but the heavy, suffocating stillness that seeps through walls. The kind that makes people lower their voices without knowing why. The kind that presses against the ears at night. Lights stayed on until morning. Shadows moved behind thin walls. A figure pacing. Another sitting still for too long. From the outside it looked like nothing. From the inside it was everything. The man returned like a storm that had only been waiting offshore. At first there were smiles, forced ones, the kind that tremble at the edges. He hugged the children a little too tightly, asked questions that sounded more like interrogations. His laughter came suddenly and stopped just as fast. The wife watched him constantly. Every movement, every look, every silence that lasted a second too long. She told herself she had done the right thing. She had kept her family together. She had saved him. She repeated those words until they felt thin and dangerous, like standing on ice and calling it solid. At night, voices dropped to whispers. Arguments were swallowed before they could rise, but anger does not disappear when it is silenced. It grows teeth. It waits. The children stopped laughing as much. They learned how to move quietly through the house, how to sense moods the way sailors sense weather. They clung to each other on the couch, knees pulled up, eyes flicking toward every sound. Neighbors noticed things they couldn't explain. A chair thrown out with a broken leg. A plate shattered and swept away too quickly. The wife's face growing paler each week. Her eyes darting at sudden noises. Her steps faster as if always late for something she couldn't name. And still no one intervened. Because no one ever does at the beginning. The husband was free. His record erased just enough to let him breathe again. But freedom did not soften him, it sharpened him. The walls of the house seemed to close in around his presence. The air felt different when he entered a room. The wife felt it most of all. She slept little, ate less, spent long hours sitting at the kitchen table long after everyone else had gone to bed, her hands wrapped around cups of untouched tea, her mind circling the same thought over and over like a moth trapped in a lamp. What had she done? She had wanted to believe in redemption. Or maybe she had wanted to believe in endings. Something neat, something final. Instead, she had reopened a door that should have stayed closed, and the town began to ask questions in quiet conversations and sideways glances. Why did she fight so hard to bring him back? Why now? Why, knowing what he was capable of? The answers did not come, only more silence. And somewhere inside that house, beneath the flickering lights and the careful footsteps, something irreversible was taking shape. A decision forming not in anger but in desperation, not in cruelty but in fear twisted beyond recognition. The kind of decision that feels in the moment like escape, the kind that history would never forgive. And as the nights grew longer and the silence deeper, one truth became unavoidable, though no one dared say it aloud yet. This story was not heading toward healing. It was heading toward something far darker. Something that would leave scars not just on one family, but on the very idea of trust, love, and protection itself. And the innocent ones, still waiting by the window in their memories, would pay the highest price. At first, she told herself this was what fixing a mistake looked like. Routine, order, normalcy forced into shape through repetition. If she kept everything moving, maybe nothing would break. Every morning began the same way. Breakfast on the table before the sun fully rose, plates placed carefully, cups aligned, the smell of coffee filling the kitchen like a shield, clothes washed, folded, stacked with precision that bordered on obsession, smiles practiced in the mirror before anyone else woke up. From the outside, it worked. From the street, the house looked alive again, a family restored, a story with a hopeful ending. Inside, it was unraveling thread by thread. The husband moved through the house like a restless shadow. He never sat still for long. He paced, back and forth, room to room, like an animal testing the limits of its cage even after the door had been opened. Freedom had not softened him. It had sharpened every edge. Every sound felt like an intrusion, a dropped spoon. A door closing too slowly, a question asked at the wrong time. The children learned this quickly. Their voices grew quieter, their questions shorter. Innocent curiosity was replaced by careful silence. When they spoke, they watched his face more than his eyes, searching for signs of approval or danger. Sometimes they found neither, and that was worse. Because unpredictability is what fear feeds on. The wife noticed everything. She noticed the way his jaw tightened when the children laughed too loudly. The way his hands curled when he was angry, fingers pressing into his palms as if holding something back. She noticed how he stood too close when he spoke to her, how his stare lingered just a second longer than it should have. Fear slipped quietly into the space where love used to live. At night, sleep abandoned her. She lay awake staring at the ceiling, counting cracks, listening to footsteps move through the house long after everyone else had gone to bed. Sometimes he stood in doorways without speaking. Sometimes he left the house in the middle of the night and returned just before dawn, bringing silence with him like a coat he refused to take off. She stopped eating without realizing it. Food lost its taste. Time lost its shape. Days blurred together, each one heavier than the last. Her thoughts looped endlessly. What if she had been wrong? What if this was worse than before? What if there was no way out that didn't destroy someone? The children felt it too. They sat closer together on the couch, knees touching, shoulders pressed tight. At night they lay awake listening. Whispered arguments drifted through walls that suddenly felt too thin, words swallowed mid-sentence, anger restrained but never gone, the kind of tension that hums in the air, vibrating through bones. Whispers felt louder than screams. Neighbors began to notice changes they couldn't quite name. A chair discarded by the trash with one leg snapped clean off. Plates broken and replaced too quickly. Loud noises late at night followed by mornings of forced politeness and eyes that wouldn't meet anyone else's gaze. There were no bruises on skin, not yet, but the house itself bore the marks. One afternoon, the wife stood outside the police station. She didn't go in right away. She stood on the steps, hands clenched so tightly her nails left half-moon marks in her palms. She imagined explaining everything. The fear, the tension, the feeling that something terrible was coming. She imagined the looks she might receive. Skepticism, pity, judgment. She imagined the questions. Why did you bring him back? Why now? Why didn't you think of the children? The door was right there. She turned around, because this time the danger wasn't just the man inside her house. It was the truth she had helped bury, the letters she had written, the promises she had made in court, the version of him she had sold to the law and to the town. Admitting fear now meant admitting she had been wrong then. And wrong had consequences. She returned home with nothing but the weight of that decision pressing harder on her chest. The house greeted her with silence. The children sat at the table doing their homework, heads bent close together. The husband stood by the window, staring out as if watching something no one else could see. In that moment, she understood something that terrified her more than anything else. She was trapped between a man who frightened her and children she could not protect. Between a past decision and a future that felt like a narrowing tunnel. Her mind began to search for answers, but it wasn't looking for justice. It wasn't looking for help. Those doors felt closed now, locked by pride, fear, and time. It was searching for escape, not a solution, not safety, an ending. The idea came quietly, almost gently. It did not announce itself with violence or rage. It arrived disguised as relief, as control, as a way to stop the noise, the tension, the constant fear of what tomorrow might bring. She pushed it away at first, horrified by her own thoughts, ashamed. She told herself she was just tired, just overwhelmed, that any mother in her position would think dark thoughts in moments of weakness. But the thought returned, again and again, each time staying a little longer. She began to see her world differently, as if it were shrinking, options disappearing one by one. Help felt impossible. Leaving felt dangerous. Staying felt unbearable. And when every path forward looks like destruction, the mind does something terrible. It chooses the one that feels quietest. The house grew heavier with secrets. The walls seemed to listen. The night stretched on endlessly. and somewhere deep inside her reason began to fade, not with a scream, not with a fight, but softly, like a light switched off in an empty room. And as the family moved through their days pretending everything was fine, pretending the worst had already passed, the truth waited patiently in the dark. Because fear, when ignored long enough, does not disappear. It transforms, and what it was becoming would change everything. The house did not scream that night. It did not warn anyone. It simply went quiet. The kind of quiet that feels wrong even before you understand why. There were no witnesses, no neighbors looking through windows, no footsteps running for help. The world outside kept breathing as if nothing was about to change forever. Inside the house, time slowed, stretched thin, and then began to slip away. The children had gone to bed earlier than usual. Their small bodies curled beneath blankets that smelled like soap and safety. They had kissed their mother goodnight without knowing it would be the last time. They did not sense danger. Children rarely do. They trust the walls around them. They trust the people who tuck them in. The husband slept heavily in the next room, deep, unaware. The steady rhythm of his breathing rose and fell, indifferent to the storm forming only a few steps away. For once he was not pacing, not watching, not listening. She sat alone at the kitchen table. One lamp was on, just one. It cast a weak circle of light that barely pushed back the darkness. The clock on the wall ticked loudly, each second landing like a blow. Her hands shook so badly she had to press them together, fingers digging into skin as if holding herself in place. This was the moment she had been running from, the moment she had pretended would never come. She stared at the table, at the scratches in the wood, at the faint stain left by a cup she had forgotten to move weeks earlier. Ordinary things, familiar things. They felt unreal now, like props in a life she no longer recognized as her own. Her thoughts raced, then stalled, then circled back again. She thought of the court, the promises she had made, the lie she had convinced herself was truth. She thought of the police station steps, how close she had been to asking for help, how easy it had been to turn away. She thought of her children, their laughter once bright and careless, how it had faded into whispers, how they flinched at sudden sounds, how they watched their father instead of playing, how they clung to her sensing danger but not knowing where it came from. And she thought of tomorrow, another day of pretending, another day of fear, another night of waiting for something terrible to happen. Her breathing grew shallow. The room felt smaller. The walls pressed in. In her mind, every door was closed. Every path forward ended the same way. This was the point of no return. What happened next would later be described in newspapers with careful words, polite words, words chosen to soften the truth because the truth itself was too heavy to place on a page. Unthinkable, unimaginable, monstrous. No one would ever fully understand the exact moment her resolve hardened, whether it was fear that pushed her, or despair, or a broken belief that this was the only way to end the suffering. Perhaps it was all of them tangled together, impossible to separate. The night swallowed everything quietly. No screams cut through the walls. No chaos spilled into the street. The house held its breath as if complicit in what was unfolding. Darkness pressed close, wrapping itself around every room, every corner, every secret. When it was over, nothing felt real. By morning, the silence was different, not tense, not waiting, final. There were no footsteps padding across the floor, no whispers from behind bedroom doors, no soft laughter drifting down the hallway. The air felt empty, hollowed out, as if life itself had been removed from the space. She stood alone in that silence. Guilt arrived immediately, heavy, crushing. It settled into her chest and refused to move. Whatever she had believed in the night before collapsed under the weight of daylight. The idea of escape, the promise of peace. They dissolved, leaving only the truth of what could never be undone. She did not run. She did not scream. When the reality of what had happened fully settled in, there was no denial left to cling to. No version of events she could tell herself to make it easier. There was only stillness and the slow realization that she had crossed a line no one ever comes back from. When authorities arrived, they expected chaos. Instead, they found a woman sitting quietly, her eyes unfocused, her posture slack as if something inside her had already shut down. She did not argue. She did not resist. She answered questions in a flat voice, giving facts without emotion, as though she were describing someone else's life. She did not look angry. She did not look evil. She looked empty, as if part of her had died long before the night itself and the rest had simply followed. The husband woke up to a nightmare he could never have imagined. A different kind of freedom awaited him now. Not from prison walls, but from responsibility, from blame, from the danger he had brought into that house. The irony was unbearable. The man once feared by the town emerged untouched. The ones who had needed protection the most were gone, and only then did the town understand. Only then did the whispers turn into horror. Neighbors replayed every memory, every missed sign, every moment they had chosen not to look too closely. They asked themselves how they had not seen it coming. But the truth was cruel and simple. The danger had never fully left that house. It had only changed shape. And in doing so, it had destroyed everything it touched. The night ended, but the silence it left behind would echo for decades. And the final chapter of this story, judgment, punishment, and the question of whether justice could ever exist here, had not yet begun. The house did not cry out that night. It did not beg. It did not warn anyone what was about to happen. It simply went still. Outside, the world continued as it always had. A passing car, a distant dog barking, wind brushing against empty streets, nothing unusual, nothing urgent. Inside the house, however, time slowed to a crawl, stretching each second until it felt heavy enough to break. There were no witnesses, no neighbors looking through half-open curtains, no footsteps running for help, no chance for anyone to stop what was coming. The children had gone to bed early, earlier than usual. Their small rooms were quiet, toys left where they had fallen, school clothes folded for the morning that would never arrive. They slept the way children do, deep, trusting, unaware that safety can disappear without warning. Their breathing was soft, even, innocent. The house felt calm, too calm. The husband slept heavily in the next room. His body stretched across the bed, chest rising and falling in slow rhythm. For once there was no pacing, no tension in his movements, no anger searching for a place to land. He was unreachable, sealed off by sleep from everything unfolding just beyond his reach. And she was awake. She sat alone at the kitchen table beneath a single lamp that hummed faintly, its light barely pushing back the darkness. The rest of the house remained in shadow, corners deep and unreadable. The clock on the wall ticked loudly. Each sound cut through the silence like a blade. Tick, pause, tick. Her hands shook so badly she had to press them together, fingers interlocking, knuckles white. She had been here before, sitting, waiting, thinking, but this time felt different. This time the air itself seemed to hold its breath. Her mind replayed the months that led to this night, the courtroom, the promises, The lie she had convinced herself was hope. She saw the police station steps again, felt the weight of the door she never opened. She thought of every night she had listened to footsteps moving through the house and wondered if tomorrow would be worse than today. And always, always her children, their quiet voices, their careful movements, the way they watched adults with eyes far older than their years, the way fear had crept into their lives before they had words for it. Her chest tightened. Breathing became work. This was the moment she could no longer avoid, the point where thinking ended and something else took over, something colder, something final. The point of no return. What happened next would later be told in careful language, words chosen not to describe but to distance. Newspaper ink would try to soften it, to make it readable, to make it possible for strangers to turn the page. Unthinkable, unimaginable, monstrous. No article would ever capture the silence of that house, the way it absorbed everything without protest. No courtroom would fully explain the state of mind that allows a person to believe that ending life is the same as ending suffering. The night moved forward without sound. No screams tore through the walls. No running footsteps echoed down the hallway. Only stillness, thick and suffocating. When it was over, the darkness felt heavier than before, as if the house itself understood what had been done and would never forgive it. She stood in that weight, frozen, unable to fully grasp the reality she had created. Morning arrived slowly. Light crept through the curtains, pale and indifferent. The house did not wake up. It did not stretch into a new day. It remained locked in the night that had just passed. The silence was absolute. No small feet padding across the floor. No voices calling for breakfast. No laughter bouncing off the walls, just emptiness. Guilt arrived with the daylight. Not all at once, but steadily, like water filling a room. It pressed against her chest, her throat, her thoughts. Whatever justification she had clung to in the darkness shattered in the light. There was no relief, no peace, only the crushing weight of what could never be undone. She did not run. She did not scream for help. There was nowhere left to go. When the reality became undeniable, she sat down and waited, her face blank, her eyes distant, as if the person who had made the decision the night before no longer existed. As if something inside her had broken so completely that it could not even feel horror anymore. Authorities arrived expecting chaos. They found none. They found a woman who answered questions without emotion, her voice steady, detached, as though she were recounting events from a story she had once read, not a life she had lived. She did not fight. She did not plead. She simply existed in the aftermath, not angry, not evil, empty. The husband woke to a reality that made no sense. A nightmare that felt unreal even as it unfolded around him. He would later say he never saw it coming, that he had slept through everything, that he was as shocked as anyone else. And in a way, it was true. Once again, he emerged untouched by consequence, free from blame, free from suspicion, free from the very danger that had defined him. The irony was unbearable. The town gathered in disbelief. Whispers spread quickly, turning into stunned silence. Neighbors replayed every interaction in their minds. Every time they had noticed something was wrong and chosen to look away. Every assumption that it was not their place to interfere. Only then did the truth settle in. The danger had never fully left that house. It had only changed shape. Fear had transformed into something far more devastating. And by the time anyone realized it, the cost had already been paid by those least able to protect themselves. The night was over, but the silence it created would echo for decades. and the final reckoning, judgment, punishment, and the impossible question of whether justice could ever exist here, still waited just beyond the door.